In a revelation that shocked the world, renowned podcaster Joe Rogan has disclosed a new scientific discovery under the eye of the Sahara. During the episode, researcher Jimmy Corsetti announced that he had finally found the lost city of Atlantis.
It was said to have mountains to the north, and you just so happen to have mountains called the Atlas mountain chain, which Atlas was said to be the very first king of Atlantis.
A mystery the whole world has been trying to solve for centuries. Get ready to be amazed as we explore these revelations and the secret world hidden in the eye of the Sahara, into the unknown. In September 2018, Joe Rogan posted this episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, where he hosted conspiracy theorist Jimmy Corsetti to discuss his new theory on the location of Atlantis. This ancient lost city has been the subject of scientific explorations, archaeological research, and conspiracy theories, and now Corsetti claims to have figured out the exact spot where Atlantis used to stand. Jimmy Corsetti is a conspiracy theorist, best known for his deep investigations into mysteries and unexplained phenomena around the world, including extraterrestrial life, archaeological mysteries, and even government propaganda. Surprisingly, though, some of his theories have actually been proven, which seems to lend some credibility to his claims about the Eye of the Sahara. But that's not all. On his YouTube channel, Bright Insight, Corsetti has also unveiled some secret CIA files, which have the potential to expose the government for concealing the secrets about this mythical location. But what exactly is the Eye of the Sahara, and why has it received so much attention in recent times? The rise of the Sahara. This is the Sahara Desert, the world's largest hot desert and the third largest desert on the planet, coming behind the cold deserts of Antarctica and the Arctic. Located on the African continent, the Sahara covers a large portion of North Africa, stretching for 3.6 million square miles. To put that into perspective, that's about the size of the United States, including Alaska and Hawaii. The desert is so large that it covers a third of the African continent, and it keeps growing wider and wider every year. The Sahara is one of the harshest environments in the world, with conditions that can only house a few die-hard animals and plants. To the west of this desert, you will find the Atlantic Ocean, and then there's the Red Sea to the east, the Mediterranean Sea on the northern side, and the Sahel Savanna to the south. This enormous desert region spreads across 10 countries, which include Algeria, Chad, Egypt, Libya, Mali, Mauritania, Morocco, Niger, Sudan, and Tunisia, as well as a disputed region known as the Territory of Western Sahara. The Sahara is famous for many things, one of which is the field of sand dunes. These dunes can sometimes rise to over 600 feet, and they cover 25% of the entire desert. Thanks to Hollywood depictions and pop culture, these sand dunes have become the most famous features of the Sahara. However, they're not even the most impressive feature of this natural wonderland. There are also mountains, plateaus, plains covered in both sand and gravel, basins, and every topographical feature you can imagine. But the most mysterious part of this desert would be the Eye of the Sahara, also known as the Richat structure. Located near Ouaddain, Mauritania, the Eye of the Sahara is a massive circular structure spanning about 30 miles in diameter and steeped in intrigue. This mysterious landmark stands in contrast to the surrounding landscape, and despite its impressive size, it's not really visible from the ground. When viewed from above, the concentric rings and symmetrical patterns of this complex give it the appearance of a giant bullseye, which was where the name Eye of the Sahara originated from. This structure is so massive that it's even visible from space, and it was this space observation that pushed it into the spotlight in the first place. When astronauts first observed this Richat structure from the International Space Station, they thought it was the site of a meteorite impact crater. But as their research progressed, they discovered that this was, in fact, a naturally occurring landmark. However, unlike other archaeological sites of its nature, the Richat structure has not been fully studied by scientists, so many of its mysteries remain uncovered. The emergence of the Eye. Since the Eye of the Sahara was discovered in the 1950s, scientists have been trying to figure out how it was formed in the first place. Several hypotheses have been proposed by several scientists, but no one has even come up with an explanation that everybody agrees with. While some theories are more plausible than others, each one has gathered its own fandom, who vehemently defend their positions on the issue. One hypothesis that has received widespread acceptance suggests that the eye of the Sahara is just a result of erosion and uplift. This theory proposes that the structure was formed as a result of the uplift of rock layers, which was possibly caused by magmatic activity or tectonic forces. The area was then eroded by wind and water, which sculpted the landscape into the marvel that it is today, exposing the concentric layers of rock and creating this marvelous circular structure. Of course, this seems to be the most plausible of all the theories, so it isn't surprising that most people with scientific knowledge would rather go with this one. However, it's not the only theory that has seen considerable support. There's another hypothesis which proposes that the Richat structure is actually an ancient geological structure known as an anticline, which has been eroded and exposed over time. An anticline is a fold in rock layers that form an arch-like shape just the way the Richat structure looks. The scientists who propose this theory believe that erosion may have washed away the soft rock layers, leaving the more resistant layers that create this concentric ring pattern. Then again, there's the salt diapir hypothesis, which suggests that the eye of the Sahara could actually be related to a salt diapir, a structure which forms when salt rises through overlying sedimentary rocks due to its buoyancy. In theory, this process may have led to the formation of a dome structure, which was then subjected to erosion over thousands or even millions of years, leaving only the exposed rings. But then again, these theories are not mutually exclusive. As a matter of fact, it is possible that the eye of the Sahara may have resulted from a combination of these geological processes. As scientists continue to peer deep into this eye, there is a chance that we might even discover something we have never even thought about, which brings us to this fascinating theory: the Atlantis Theory. Long ago, in an unknown land, there was a city unlike anything the earth has ever seen, a place so beautiful, it could have only been crafted by the gods. According to folklore, it actually was created by Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea, earthquakes, and horses. The city was occupied by half gods and half men, and they built massive buildings that would put any modern architecture to shame. Atlantis was a utopian civilization, more advanced than any city of its time, and it possessed great naval power. According to these ancient stories, Atlantis was made up of concentric islands, separated by wide moats and linked by a single canal that penetrated right to the center. These lush islands contained gold, silver, as well as other precious metals. But that's not where the allure of Atlantis ends. It was also said to have been home to every exotic animal you can find, and it was the closest you could come to creating paradise on Earth. However, the story doesn't end well for this dream island, because around 9600 BC, it mysteriously sank into the ocean, never to be seen again. It's one of the most romanticized historical tales to ever be told, but how much of it is actually true? And if it turns out to be an actual city, where is it? To uncover the secrets of Atlantis, we need to take a look at the origin of the story itself, and that's where Plato comes in. The story of Atlantis was first told by the Greek philosopher Plato, who described it as an island larger than Libya and Asia Minor put together. According to Plato, this island was located in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, just beyond the Pillar of Hercules, which many now believe is referring to the Strait of Gibraltar. Poseidon watched over the city, and he put his son Atlas on the throne to handle the affairs of the people. But as the Atlanteans grew more powerful, their sense of morality declined. They started conquering nations and empires both far and wide. They were said to have conquered Africa as far as Egypt and Europe as far as Tyrrhenia before they were driven back by an Athenian-led alliance. Shortly after these wars, the city was reportedly struck by divine punishment. Earthquakes, flooding, and then one day it just sank into the depths of the ocean. Origin of the story. As fantastic as this story sounds, though, it's hard to determine whether it's a true story or just a figment of someone's imagination. Plato himself wasn't actually the first person to tell this story. As a matter of fact, he claimed he heard the story of Atlantis from his grandfather, who had also heard it from an Athenian statesman known as Solon, 300 years before Plato's time. Solon also claimed he heard it from an Egyptian priest, who said it had happened 9,000 years before that. So in essence, Plato was simply repeating a story that was over 9,000 years old, which further deepens the mystery. But then again, no one knows whether Plato himself believed the story. This was a time when morality was at its lowest, and war was ravaging several ancient empires and cities. To boost the idea of an ideal society, writers in those days would use stories of ancient victory and calamity to call the people's attention to recent events like the Trojan War or the disastrous invasion of Sicily by Athens in 413 BC. Plato's stories were particularly controversial in those days, and many people believed he was a little bit crazy. But his followers believed him, especially one named Cantor. However, even among his followers, there were many who thought the story was just an idle tale. One of them was a man named Strabo, who would later document Aristotle's infamous joke about how Plato builds cities out of thin air and then destroys them. A lot of people took this joke literally, and by the 1st century of the Christian era, everyone had stopped talking about Atlantis altogether. Since no one could find the exact location of this ancient city, it was gradually reduced to a mere fable, a myth no one could prove. That was until another writer picked up the pen to document this ancient story one more time. The New Atlantis. In the year 1627, the English philosopher and scientist Francis Bacon published a utopian novel he titled The New Atlantis. In this version of the ancient tale, Bacon described a society that was advanced both politically and scientifically, just like Plato's Atlantis. This empire was supposedly located on an unknown oceanic island, and it was a place of magical wonder, where the people believed in generosity and enlightenment, dignity and splendor, piety and public spirit. But even though the story has been retold many, many times, there is one question no one has ever been able to answer. Where is Atlantis? 2,300 years ago, Plato gave the whole world a puzzle to solve. And since then, many philosophers, explorers, and scholars have tried to pinpoint the exact spot where this mythical city used to stand. But even after so many years, we still don't know exactly where it is, but several theories may point us in the right direction. This brings us to the business of the day. During the infamous Joe Rogan podcast, Jimmy Corsetti outlines his findings, which suggests that Atlantis may have actually existed in the region now known as the Sahara Desert. He believes that the Richat structure was actually the real Atlantis. While this claim may seem outlandish, Corsetti presented many interesting points to solidify his claims. He describes the Eye of the Sahara as the site which best matches Plato's description of Atlantis, and he presented 6 pieces of evidence to back his claims. 1. The 5 concentric circles. When Plato wrote about Atlantis back in 360 BC, these were his exact words. Poseidon carved the mountain where his love dwelt into a palace and enclosed it with 3 circular moats of increasing width, varying from 1 to 3 stadia, and separated by rings of land proportional in size. Based on Plato's description, which we will get into more details about, Atlantis looked something like this. The existence of concentric circles in both Plato's Atlantic and the Richat structure is one of the strongest pieces of evidence supporting this theory. These concentric circles are made up of resistant quartzite rocks, which make up the ridges, as well as lower-level sedimentary rocks between them. You see, Corsetti's hypothesis isn't that the Eye of the Sahara was man-made. He actually believes that the structure preceded the city, and that Atlantis was simply built on an existing landmark. However, some experts have disproved this claim, arguing that the fact that both had concentric rings was not unusual at all. Also, since the rings aren't complete in certain places, it's unclear how water would have filled the structure as Plato described. Also, by taking a look at the whole formation, you will realize that Plato's description features 3 rings of water, instead of 3 suggested by Corsetti. But Corsetti also holds another card tied with these concentric rings. You see, in Plato's writing, he described a particular canal dug by the Atlanteans alongside the bridges. They also carved tunnels into the rings of rocks so that ships could easily pass into the city around the mountains. This canal, which supposedly ran through all the walls to the inner structure, is evidently absent from the Eye of the Sahara. According to Plato, the canal connected the rings, but nothing of the sort can be seen on the Richat structure. But that's not the only evidence Corsetti presents in his research. 2. Size comparison. To further explain his reasoning, Jimmy Corsetti also argued that the size of the Richat structure matches the size of Plato's Atlantis. In his writing, Plato mentioned that the city had 3 circular moats of increasing width, varying from 1 to 3 stadia, which roughly translates to 14.5 miles in diameter. Corsetti claims that this size is in proportion to the diameter of the Richat structure, but that depends on where you consider the outer edge of the structure. According to NASA's measurements, the structure measures 28 miles in diameter, which is almost double the size of Plato's Atlantis. This considerable difference in size is another factor that has tainted the credibility of Corsetti's claims, as it directly threatens the very premise of his argument. 3. Surrounding geography. When describing Atlantis, Plato also mentioned that the mythical city was surrounded by mountains to the north, and the rest of the surroundings was flat plains, which then opened up to the Atlantic Ocean to the south. Surprisingly, this fits the exact description Plato gave in his writing, and at least it seemed this theory might actually be plausible. For the opening to the sea, Corsetti proposed that the sand drift to the southwest is undeniable evidence that it used to be a water pathway. Considering the fact that the Atlas Mountain isn't too far away from the Richat structure, it seems to perfectly fit Plato's image of the lost city. 4. The map of Herodotus. In the time of ancient Greece, there was a man named Herodotus. He was a writer, poet, and philosopher, and he might actually hold the key that unlocks this mystery. In his days, Herodotus traveled far and wide, covering a large part of the Persian Empire, Egypt, Libya, Syria, Babylonia, Susa in Elam, Lydia, and Phrygia. His trips also took him to Thrace, Macedonia, and even beyond the Danube. As he traveled, Herodotus documented the stories of the people he met, the legends he was told, and the larger-than-life characters he discovered on the way. Thanks to his work, we're able to peer back into thousands of years and uncover tales that would have been forgotten. Following the path of his travels, followers of Herodotus created a world map containing peoples, lands, and geographical features which he wrote about. One of the prominent features of this map is Mount Atlas, and the people who lived around it were known as the Atlantes, or people of Mount Atlas. Although Herodotus never mentioned anything about a city or place called Atlantis, the similarity between the spot where the Atlantes tribe are located on the map and the location of the Richat structure on the actual world map is pretty striking. Both are located near Mount Atlas, and both are found at almost the same spot in both an ancient map and a modern map. Coincidence? We'll let you decide that. 5. Land of the Elephants. While describing the kind of exotic wildlife that you could find in Atlantis, Plato mentioned how there was an abundance of elephants in the city, as well as other exotic and rare animals. Coincidentally, Mauritania, where the Eye of the Sahara is located, used to be home to elephants, and it was only recently in 1989 that the species completely disappeared from the region. Also, archaeologists have retrieved several elephant bones near and in the Eye, lending even more credibility to this theory. 6. Secret CIA files. Back in 1967, the CIA launched a covert operation, which the public believed was a geomagnetic survey. Recently, the CIA declassified the files on this mission, revealing a little detail that could change everything. According to this declassified file, the operation was spread across several locations within the United States and elsewhere like Washington, California, Kenya, Ivory Coast, and Puerto Rico. According to the United States government, the mission was to study the geomagnetic properties of some specific spots on the planet, including the Eye of the Sahara. While this may seem like a harmless survey, things get sketchy when you realize that the findings of this survey were never released to the public. On the second page of this declassified document, you will find one strange section. It reads, "While the scientific aspects of this survey are totally unclassified and available to the worldwide scientific community," and then it just simply stops there. Every other part of this section remains classified, even extending to the next page, and it begs the question, What is the government hiding? Does the fact that there is a scientific part mean that there are also other objectives for the mission? If that is true, then what are those objectives, especially those carried out at the eye of the Sahara? Unfortunately, though, we may never find the answers to these questions, and while it's quite improbable that the mission had anything to do with Atlantis, the possibility cannot be ruled out. 7. The smoking gun. While these other pieces of evidence may be easily countered, disputing the archaeological evidence may be quite difficult. You see, over the years, seasoned archaeologists have explored the length and breadth of the Richat structure, and their search has turned up some interesting artifacts. This includes arrowheads, spears, stone spheres, surfboards, ship hulls, oars, and so much more. All from the same time frame the city of Atlantis existed. These archaeological finds are cross-generational, spanning several eras of human civilization. There are stone tools characterized by distinctive oval and pear-shaped hand axes, which can be dated back to the Homo erectus. So scientists believe that these tools were actually made about 130 years ago, based on the timeline of the Acheulean era. Considering the fact that Atlantis was built just 12,000 years ago, it makes it quite implausible that the artifacts at the eye of the Sahara were left by the Atlanteans. But that's not all. Most of the artifacts recovered from the site were found in the outermost depression of the structure, but nothing of that nature has ever been discovered in the innermost part. In fact, no recognizable hidden deposits or man-made structures have ever been observed in the eye of the Sahara, as at the making of this video. So the idea that a thriving human civilization used to live here may be hard to believe. There are no remains of clay pots, no evidence of any engineering, and no remains of walls or man-made structures. Because these features have been observed in several places where ancient cities used to stand, it's hard to imagine how a utopian city like Atlantis would have existed here without leaving a single trace. Before we go on with the rest of the video, here's our subscribers' pick for today. Recently, Joe Rogan announced a sudden discovery under the eye of the Sahara, and the revelations are staggering. In episode 1742 of the Joe Rogan Experience, conspiracy theorist Jimmy Corsetti explained how he believes that the eye of the Sahara was actually the site where the lost city of Atlantis used to be. With much convincing evidence, Corsetti explains the similarities in Plato's description and the structure of the eye. However, a lot of people don't agree with this theory due to many inconsistencies. Do you think Corsetti's theory is accurate? Let us know in the comments section below. Now let's get back to the video. Life before the Sahara. Did you know that every 21,000 years, the Sahara transforms into a lush green land with lakes and trees and vegetation? Could this mean that Atlantis actually existed during one of these periods? According to findings made by researchers who dug deep into the climate history of this desert, the Sahara actually takes on a periodic transformation from time to time. In the past 800,000 years, the Sahara Desert has experienced certain wet periods, and according to scientists, it's one of the most remarkable environmental changes on our planet. To understand this lost history of the desert, the researchers conducted a study simulating the moist period, which is usually caused by a dramatic change in Earth's orbit, known as orbital precession. You see, when the Earth sways on its axis, it affects the amount of energy it receives in different seasons. This then impacts the African monsoon, which in turn affects the overall climate over the Sahara. In the northern hemisphere, this orbital precession makes the summer even warmer, triggering what we know as the North African humid period. In this period, the monsoons and rain over the Sahara become stronger and stronger, and eventually, green vegetation begins to emerge from the previously dry desert. Scientists believe the only time this 21,000-year cycle did not occur was during the Ice Ages. Since the atmosphere was permanently cool, the monsoon did not function normally, and the Sahara remained dry for that period. Historians also believe that it was during this green period that humans traveled from Africa to other parts of the Earth. This ancient intercontinental trip was made possible by the corridors, which served as nature's migration gate. Whenever it was opened, humans extended their reach, traveling to and from Africa through the North African pathway, and it was closed when the deserts prevailed over the greenery again. However, it should be noted that further studies are being conducted to confirm the validity of these findings, so they shouldn't be taken as concrete, undeniable facts. But the intrigue doesn't end there. Recently, scientists have discovered large volumes of water under the Sahara, which may be 100 times the amount found on the surface. However, a detailed map of this water system has not been developed, so information on the discovery is still limited. While it may be possible that Atlantis did exist in what we now know as the Eye of the Sahara, it's just one of the many theories that have been raised in the search for Atlantis. For a place that's probably the most popular lost city in history, it isn't surprising that Atlantis has enjoyed its fair share of conspiracy theories. As Charles Orser, the curator of history at the New York State Museum, once said, "Pick a spot on the map, and someone has said Atlantis was there." The theories surrounding Atlantis are so diverse and varied that it's hard to sort through them all. The Atlantic Ocean theory. Most people didn't even consider the idea that Atlantis could actually be a real place until the late 19th century. In the year 1882, a writer named Ignatius Donnelly released a book titled Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. It was this book that opened our eyes to the fact that Pluto's writing may not have been a work of fiction. In this book, Donnelly argued that the accomplishments of the ancient world, such as metallurgy, language, and even agriculture, were handed down by an earlier advanced civilization. In the book, Donnelly explained that these ancient cultures were obviously not advanced enough to develop these technologies on their own, so it was possible that they simply stumbled on a discovery that had already been made by the previous generations, and they simply followed instructions. What this would also mean is that there are several human civilizations that have been lost to the pages of history. While we can easily access the history of the ancient Egyptians, the Greeks, Vikings, and other ancient cultures, there's no telling how many other ancient civilizations have been lost to the passage of time, with no historical records to keep them alive. Perhaps this would have been the case for Atlantis, if not for Pluto's writing. Donnelly then postulated that the island of Atlantis may have actually been situated in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, going by Pluto's writing. According to this theory, the exact spot would be around the Straits of Gibraltar, which we talked about earlier in this video. Even though many experts have poked holes in this claim, many believers cling to the theory, mostly due to the fact that it credits the Atlantic Ocean as the correct location. The Bermuda Triangle. Could it also be possible that the city of Atlantis was not buried by a great flood, but instead was swallowed up by the Bermuda Triangle? One man seemed to think so. His name was Charles Berlitz. Charles is the grandson of Maximilian Berlitz, the founder of the well-known Berlitz Language School. He's also an author of many books, many of which delve into the subject of the paranormal. In the 1970s, Berlitz published his own theories about the location of Atlantis. He claimed it was a real continent, located off the Bahamas, and that it had actually fallen victim to the notorious Bermuda Triangle. One of the very few pieces of evidence supporting this claim are the man-made walls and streets found off the coast of Bimini. However, this was discredited after scientists found out that the structures were made by nature. The Antarctica Theory. Another author who contributed to the vast research on Atlantis is Charles Hapgood. Hapgood's theory takes us to the icy landscape of Antarctica, where he believes the ancient city of Atlantis stood many, many years ago. According to the author, some 12,000 years ago, the Earth's crust shifted, displacing the continent that would become Antarctica from its previous location. Antarctica was moved further north, where it still stands today. Hapgood believes that back in prehistoric times, Antarctica was a temperate continent, which was home to an advanced civilization. But as the Earth began to shift, the Atlanteans found themselves at the mercy of Mother Nature, and their magnificent city was buried under thick layers of ice. Today, archaeologists and historians continue to explore the eye of the Sahara, Antarctica, and other regions where Atlantis may have existed, as we search for this lost paradise. Thank you for watching this video. See you in the next one.